Let's see. There we go. So let me start. I assume most people in the room are familiar with RFID, but let me do a quick review. I know we're also taping this presentation as well for people who may not be as familiar. So an RFID tag, the best way to understand it, you break down the acronym. RF is radio frequency. These devices operate using radio waves. And ID is the identification part of it. They use radio frequency to transmit the identification of things, animals, or people. And the way they work is there is a tiny little microchip. If you take a look at that finger, that's actually about a 10-year-old RFID microchip. Nowadays, they've gotten them down to about a 20th of that size. So they're extremely small. You can get some of them that are small enough, or so small you can barely see them. But by themselves, the microchips really don't have much power. They can't really do anything until you hook them up to an antenna. And so what you see next to there, that's an RFID microchip. I took that photograph at the Metro Future Store in Germany, where they are affixing RFID tags to inventory, things like Kraft Philadelphia cream cheese and Pantene shampoo. So what happens, you have the little microchip in the center, in that little, it's kind of hard to see there, but in that little yellow square, there's the tiny microchip. And the antenna is what it uses to pick up and transmit its information. They're called RFID tags or RFID transponders because they transmit and they respond. And typically, the RFID tags, at least the implants and the other tags that we're going to be talking about, typically don't have their own power source. They operate from a reader or some environmental power source. So in this case, what's happening is this handheld reader is emitting a radio signal in a particular frequency. That's getting picked up by the antenna, which on this particular RFID tag is X-shaped. They come in all sorts of different shapes. They're round or square. They can be small or big. And this particular antenna is picking up the signal from the reader. It's using that energy to power the microchip and get the microchip to release its information in a little burst. Typically, these microchips, if they're being used for inventory purposes, contain a 96-bit ID code, and that's really all they transmit. The same is also true for human implants, at least the commercially available version, the Verichip. Now, in the case of the Verichip, what you have is the tiny microchip, but it's been embedded into a medical-grade capsule of glass and has the antenna is actually wrapped around it inside of there. And typically, these things are referred to as being about the size of a grain of rice, but if you take a look, they're actually a little bit bigger than a grain of rice. You wouldn't accidentally get one of these in you. I'm constantly reassuring the public that there's no chance of these accidentally winding up in their pepper shaker and getting ingested, for example. They're pretty big. They are injected with a device called a cannula, and in order to get it into a person's body, you have to actually numb the area first. So the Verichip Corporation, now known as the Positive ID Corporation, in I think its 5th name change in the last decade, has been implanting them into the biceps area of the arm, right about here. And what they do first is they put an injection of lidocaine, or sort of a numbing agent, and then they take this very big injector device and they insert the microchip into the flesh. As you can see here, the top part of this microchip, well, originally when they started implanting these into people and animals, they found that they had a tendency to migrate because a slippery capsule of glass inside the body has really nothing to anchor onto. And so one of the early problems, and indeed one of the problems they're still having with these things, is called migration, meaning that you can put a microchip into a dog, they put it in the scruff of the neck, and you'll often find it as far back as the back legs. In racehorses, they had them migrating literally towards their internal organs. So that was an early problem with the implantable chips. And they've now resolved that by dipping it in a polypropylene substance. This waxy type coating here is actually a plastic coating. It's called BioBond. And what it does is it's got a very porous sort of surface to it. So when it goes into the body, there's an inflammation reaction that the body undergoes. And as part of that inflammation, the body encapsulates this device in a tissue, in a capsule of tissue. And that interweaves with this porous surface, and the idea is that that would lock it into place. Works some of the time, doesn't work all of the time. Now, the question has arisen, are these devices safe? And in 2004, in October 2004, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States approved the VeriChip for use in human beings. And if you've heard of the FDA approval process, it can be a very lengthy, drawn-out, and bureaucratic process. When they approved the VeriChip for human use, there were a lot of questions. And in fact, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Food and Drug Administration and said, what documents did you review? How did you assess the safety of this device? And that was in 2004. It's now 2010. I've been waiting 6 years, and I've yet to receive a response from my Freedom of Information Act request to the FDA. I'm not the only person, by the way, to have filed that request. Todd Lewin, who we'll be talking about in a moment with the Associated Press, filed a similar request 3.5 years ago and has also not heard a response. So there's deafening silence from the FDA in terms of their approval on this device. It was about a year and a half after the FDA approved the device that I got an email from someone by the name of Jeannie, whose bulldog Leon had a microchip implanted in him, like so many animals do around the globe now. And Leon developed a cancerous tumor around his microchip. So Jeannie went to her, said to her veterinarian, I think that there's obviously something to do with this microchip, that the tumor has surrounded it and is attached to it. So she was able to get the pathology report and able to actually get the tissue samples of this tumor and sent it off after about 2 years of trying to find anyone who would listen to her, sent them off to some researchers in Italy who had actually reported on another cancer that had formed around a microchip in another dog a while before that. And so they were able to look at this and did determine that this was indeed cancer. It had indeed formed around the microchip, and they believe there was an association. So Jeannie, being an extraordinary researcher in her own right and a very tenacious person, she proceeded to read everything she could find on these implants, and she discovered some little-known documentation or some little-known journal articles, not online, not in PubMed. These were articles that I had to go down into the stacks of Harvard to dig up in pathology and oncology journals, veterinary pathology reports. And anyway, that launched me on about a year and a half sort of epic adventure as things would turn out, to uncover this information, to discover that yes, indeed, these devices were causing cancer in laboratory animals. It was being reported in the scientific literature. The VeriChip Corporation, the Home Again Corporation, all the companies that make implantable microchips for animals were remaining mum on this. They were silent about it. I then found out that they were receiving numerous reports from pet owners that their pets had been developing cancer in these microchips as well. So Jeannie sort of got me launched. I spent many, many hours over in the basement of the medical library at Harvard University looking these up in literally dusty stacks and photocopying them in this era of the internet. That was quite an experience. And put all of that together into a 52-page report. I shared those findings with Todd Lewin from the Associated Press. He went on his own 6-month investigative reporting adventure, speaking to cancer experts, the authors of these various studies, talking to the VeriChip Corporation that was marketing this for use in humans, talking to the FDA and everyone else he could get a hold of. So it was kind of who are the folks who uncovered Watergate? One of those kinds of adventures. It certainly had that feel to it. And his story broke in 2007. So now let me tell you what we found as a result of all of that research that we did. All right, we found that these microchips are strongly linked with cancer in laboratory animals. This is rodents, mice and rats. We found that when you put these into mice and rats, between 1 and 10% of the animals implanted with the microchips develops a fast-growing malignant tumor around or adjacent to the microchip. These tumors became so large in some cases that they led to the death of the animals within a matter of weeks. They grew very, very quickly, very invasive tumors. In many cases, they metastasized, which means that you've got a tumor in one part of the body around the microchip. It releases the cancer cells into other parts of the body, and we found these animals were developing tumors or cancers in the lymphatic system and in other parts of their bodies as well. All right, this is an example of one of the tumors that was removed from a mouse. You can see that the microchip, in most cases, was located right in the center of the tumors. So when they took the tumors out of these animals and cut them open, gleaming in the middle, just like the pit of a peach, would be the microchip inside of these rather rather repulsive tumors. All right, let me go through some of the studies. When I was searching for this information, I used a couple of different strategies to try to identify all of the studies that had been done about the safety of implantable microchips. So Jeannie turned me on to 3 or 4 articles. I was able to use those, and of course anyone who's done academic research knows that you can look at the work cited and then sort of follow them, and you look at the works that they cite. And when all was told, that plus going through PubMed, the online medical database of medical research, I was able to find, I believe it was 13 different studies that were reviewed in all. And in 8 studies, the researchers did find cancer. So if you take a look at some of these, they go all the way back to 1996. Keith Johnson's original study in 1996, he took a look at 2,000 mice that had been implanted over a 2-year period and found that about 1% of them developed cancer. Tillman and colleagues in 1997, looking at over 4,000 mice over their lifespan, found that just under 1% developed cancer. Palmer, 800 mice looked at over 2 years, found that 2% were developing cancer. And as you go on down the list, you see that it's between 0.8% and just over 10% of these animals developing cancer. All right. Now, when as an academic researcher, I can say that the word cause is a word that you avoid like the plague, and I'm sure anyone in here with an academic background knows you never use the word cause, you use the word associated with, found in conjunction with. What I found really interesting about these, the write-ups and the research by these pathology and oncology researchers, who, by the way, really were not looking for microchip implant reactions. They were actually doing other studies, but they were so stunned by the number of animals getting sick that they kind of took time out from the other research they were doing to write up their findings. And they used the word cause. They used the word induced. In fact, they began referring to these tumors as microchip-induced tumors. So here the transponders were the cause of the tumors. There was an unequivocal association between the implant and the sarcoma. The tumors are clearly due to the implanted microchips. So rarely in my research have I seen such clear language that this was not just linked, but they were clearly attributing these tumors to the presence of the microchips. In all cases, the tumors developed at the site of the microchip. This is an example of another tumor. This one, I believe, was removed from a rat. And in this case, you see the cross-section of the tumor, and that little hole there is where the microchip was removed from. When they looked microscopically, and these reports go into actually quite a bit of detail and quite a bit of depth, so anyone with a background in oncology would certainly find that they had done extensive amounts of research and homework on this, examining these things histologically and in every other possible way that oncology researchers can do this. And what they found is that the inflammation process around these microchips and the process of forming that little capsule of tissue around the microchip was giving rise to the tumor. And the question was, what was that process? And I'll get to that in just a moment, what might have been giving rise to that process. But they did find that it was arising from that tissue capsule. All right, so in going over these 8 different studies, I was able to extract a couple of different hypotheses as to why these implants might be causing cancer. The first one has to do with foreign body tumorigenesis. That is the fact that any foreign body implanted into any animal has the potential to form a cancer, that is sort of a known outcome that is possible. In this case, the hypothesis is that those cellular changes that were the inflammation process and then the tissue formation process itself, something in that might go awry and lead to the cancer. The second one is post-injection sarcoma, and veterinary researchers will tell you that when you give a cat a regular vaccination, you just immunize a cat against some feline leukemia, etc., that a small percentage of cats will actually develop a cancer in response to the injection, and that's called post-injection sarcoma. So one of the questions, is this coming from the actual injection process itself? It's one possibility. The third, I think, is the more disturbing one, that the implant itself may have genotoxic properties, and I'll explain in a moment why that is a strong possibility. That something in the implant, whether it is the glass, whether it is the electromagnetic radiation that's occurring around that, or whether it's the biobond, the plastic substance, something in there appears to be genotoxic, and those are materials that actually damage the genetic material in an animal and can give rise to cancer as a result. And then fourth was the question, does the radiofrequency aspect of this, does the fact that you've got an active transponder that is picking up and responding to electromagnetic radiation in the environment, could that inside of the body be somehow implicated in the cancer? And it could be a result of all four of these, or perhaps none of these. We don't know. More research needs to be done to determine that. All right, so that gets us to the question of human microchip implants. The question that arises, and I'm going to go through a series of frequently asked questions about this research. You can find this, by the way, if you go to our website at antichips.com. There's an FAQ document on there with answers to over 80 different questions about implantable microchips, everything from who manufactures them, who they're implanted in, how they are removed, the social implications, the surveillance questions, security questions. It's all in there, and these are some of the questions that are more specific to this cancer research. So are the microchips that have been causing cancer in these laboratory animals the same as the Vera chip that was approved by the FDA and has now been implanted into what some estimates say is about 2,000 people worldwide? And the answer is yes, they're virtually identical. Right here in this picture, you see two microchips, two implantable microchips. One of them is an animal microchip, one of them is a human microchip. And to be honest with you, I don't even remember which is which anymore. I've got it labeled back on my computer, but they look the same. The only difference is the human microchip has a 16-digit ID number encoded into its internal microchip, and the animal microchip has a 10-digit ID number encoded into the microchip. But other than that, they're identical. So could humans develop cancer from implantable microchips is the next question, because we do know that with this device approved by the FDA, and I'll get to just a moment as to whether the FDA was aware of